Is it possible to live with a woman, to have children with her, and at the same time to fantasize about torturing young men? Can you be a pillar of society, an exemplary businessman, and at the same time kidnap and kill people? The answer to both questions is yes, you can. This is, of course, immoral, demanding the utmost condemnation, but unfortunately possible. Serial killers have mastered the art of double life to perfection, and that's why they're so dangerous. Because they're gonna open up a facade of normality around them. They feed their surroundings with illusions that they sometimes even believe in. They seem quite ordinary, they don't stand out from the crowd. They are polite and sometimes engaged in local community activities. They go to work, they start a family, but it's just the first layer they show every day. Below it is the dark and scary one that is at the same time the real one. For the killer I'm going to talk to you about today, this double life game was going on every day. First, he tried to pretend to his father, then to the public. But his killer nature had to rise sooner or later. And that's what happened, making John Wayne Gacy one of the most violent psychopaths in the history of the United States. Gacy's childhood and youth were not easy and are almost a book example of how fatal upbringing, rejection, and contempt on the part of a parent can affect the psyche of a teenage boy. John was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago. He had two sisters. His mother had Danish roots. His father was Polish. The man was extremely harsh and brutal. Besides, he was an alcoholic. He treated his family badly, especially John, whom he wanted to raise up to be a real tough man. But the boy was different. Quiet, withdrawn, and slightly overweight, which was the source of many of his problems. Therefore, his father saw in him no reason to be proud. On the contrary, he was his failure, a disgrace that he had to face every day. Therefore, when he came back from work, he immediately locked himself in the garage so that he didn't have to spend time with his child. It was extremely painful for John because he was very concerned about his father's acceptance. Instead, he received contemptible looks and comments. Gacy Sr. not only often looked into the bottle, but also beat his wife and children. It wasn't a house filled with love and care. It was a home that was a huge source of stress and trauma for a lifetime. At the age of 11, Gacy survived a serious accident. He hit his head with a swing. 5 years later, he was diagnosed with hemorrhoids. The boy often lost consciousness, which, according to his father, was a sign of weakness. But John really suffered. In addition, he was diagnosed with heart disease. Nevertheless, the father was still strict with him and did not look at his son with a favorable eye. Especially because the son did not fulfill his hopes. Not only was he struggling with being overweight, but he was also quite poor in education. He couldn't handle her. It seemed like he wasn't bringing the world together as much. After graduating from high school, Gacy moved to Las Vegas. That's the first time he could cut himself off from his toxic father. He was far away. He could only think of himself without fear of becoming the object of disillusionment and disappointment. He got a job at the funeral house, where he was cleaning up. It was a low-paid job, but Gacy finally had the feeling that he was doing something for himself. That he is self-sufficient and his fate no longer depends on his father. Every day, for many hours, he was alone with the bodies. The bodies of the dead were his only company. But even this occupation after some time ceased to give satisfaction, and the money earned was too small, so John went back to Chicago. That's where he decided to get his education, so he went to college. In the meantime, he understood what he really likes in life and, just as importantly, can do. It turns out he's a great salesman. He started working for a shoe company, and because he was doing really well, he was transferred to a men's salon in Springfield, Illinois. During this time, thrown into a whirlwind of work and professional challenges, Gacy was admitted to the hospital. It's because of heart problems. John was also overweight, which did not help him fight the disease. However, he did not want to slow down. He dreamed of a career and a position in the local community, and that's what he did. As soon as his condition improved, he became involved in the activities of several organizations. He even became vice president of Gacy's, which was engaged in business and personal development. For his activity, Gacy received the title of Man of the Year. Many people looked at him with indiscriminate admiration. He made the impression of the ambitious, thirsty success of a young man. He was already a supporter of the local community, and his position grew steadily. In 1964, it was time for another element of life arrangement: marriage. John married his workmate, Merlin Myers. Her father was the owner of one of the fast food restaurants in Waterloo. Seeing his brother-in-law's commitment, Mr. Myers offered Gacy his job. He welcomed her with pleasure. He moved with his wife to Iowa to pursue his career there. The job turned out to be a real challenge for him. A lot of things he had to learn from the beginning, but he liked what he was doing, and he was very hard-working. He disappeared from home sometimes for 12 hours to take care of everyone. He dreamed of running not one restaurant in the future, but their entire network. His talent for interest, as well as ambition, made it not just a naive wish, but a quite realistic scenario for life. After some time, Gacy was given a new role. He became a father. His wife first gave birth to a son and then a daughter, so it seemed that John had everything most people dreamed of: career stability, money, and a loving family. Could he have wanted something more? As it turned out later, yes. It wasn't the one thing that would satisfy him to the full. Gacy was hiding a dark nature that would soon be revealed. John was becoming the subject of rumors more and more often. First quiet, then louder and louder. They wondered if his marriage was happy and sincere. His sexual orientation was questioned, and all because John liked to be surrounded by men, especially young people. His wife, however, ignored these theories, deeply believing that they were not true. Reality hit her in 1968. Gacy was convicted of having sex with a teenager. Nothing like Mark Miller testified that John lured him into his house, tied him up, and then brutally him. The man denied, however, convincing him that the boy had voluntarily had sex with him, for which he later received money. But the court ruled that Miller was telling the truth. In addition, it turned out that Gacy paid another teenager to intimidate the boy and in this way persuade him to withdraw his charges. Attacking the wall, John admitted his guilt. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. So the scrupulously arranged life of a happy husband, father, and businessman quickly collapsed. The wife, of course, filed for divorce as soon as Gacy crossed the walls of the Iowa State Prison. This is how the first, but not the last, marriage of a man ended. In prison, Gacy's entrepreneurial skills were very useful. He was the perfect embedded. He didn't venture into adventures, cooperated, and engaged in prison life because John knew perfectly well that if he was doing well, he would have a chance of early release. He was very sparing in talking about himself behind bars. He refused to admit that he was convicted of raping a teenager. If other prisoners were to learn about this crime, John would automatically fall to the last position in the prison hierarchy, and his daily life would be very heavy. But John had a simple goal: to sit down in prison and then return to the community. This strategy paid him a great deal because he was released after 18 months, which means that his sentence was reduced by more than 8 years. After his release from prison in 1970, John returned to Chicago. He wanted as soon as possible to regain the high social status he secured living in Iowa. He believed that the past would not follow him and that he would be able to become a prosperous businessman again. At the same time, he felt a certain regret, because while he was sitting his sentence, his father died. Gacy was deeply disappointed to realize that he would never reconcile with his father again and would not be able to improve their relationship. He still loved him very much, and he cared for his acceptance. But the chance to do that disappeared with the death of Gacy the Sr. John had to deal with it and get on his feet. He got a good job and became a restaurant manager. This allowed him to buy a house, which was partly owned by him and partly by his mothers and sisters. The building was located on West Summerdale Street in the Norwood Park Township. The surroundings were very pleasant to him. It was quiet and clean, and besides, he liked the neighbors, with whom he spent more and more time. They didn't know about his past, and they did not even suspect that John had committed such a brutal crime. It's hard for them to be surprised because Gacy was a master of camouflage. He was able to perfectly fit into the environment and create the version of himself that others wanted to see in him, but his true nature made himself known again. On January 2nd, 1972, something happened that changed John forever. It was then that he discovered that taking life gives him incredible pleasure. 16-year-old Timothy McCoy was at a Chicago bus station. He was going to sleep there because the bus hadn't arrived until the next day. Unfortunately, he met Gacy. The man offered to stay in his house. The boy agreed and walked away unaware of what was about to happen to him. During the testimony, after his arrest, Gacy was convinced that he saw Tim standing with a knife in the morning. He was sure the boy was trying to kill him, so he attacked first, took his knife, and killed the teenager. It was only later that he realized that the boy was preparing breakfast and was not a danger. But it was too late to think about it. Tim's body was hidden under Gacy's house. Only a dozen months after his release, John was brought to trial again. He was accused of sexual abuse of a young boy. However, the case collapsed when the teenager did not appear at the hearing. This time, Gacy could breathe with relief. He also decided to get married again. In 1972, he was chosen by Carol Hoff, who had two daughters from her previous relationship. Carol, unlike her neighbors, knew about her husband's criminal history. But she believed that these mistakes were already behind him, and John was a valuable and law-abiding American. She couldn't be more wrong. In 1974, John turned gastronomy into construction. He founded his own decoration company, PDM Contractors. So it seemed that his life was back on track again. But instead of expanding his business and broadening his horizons, John decided to make his profession a passport to pathological fantasies. Thanks to the company, he was able to hire young boys, who he offered lower rates than qualified workers. He drove them to his house and harassed them there. But the boys were silent because many of them doubted that anyone would believe their version of the events. Gacy was already a high-ranking businessman, respected and liked in society. Therefore, he allowed himself to do more and more, and the harassment of young workers became regular. John's behavior also changed over time. He became more and more violent and aggressive. He beat his wife several times. He stopped sleeping with her and drove her away from him. He also complained of insomnia. One day, Carol found a storehouse with naked men in her house. John didn't even deny it. He admitted that the magazines belonged to him and that he had long had homosexual tendencies. Carol had no choice. The further struggle for marriage was already pointless. The couple divorced in 1976. Despite the breakup of family life, John continued to play an important role in the local community. On the net you can find his photos, in which he appears in a clown costume. He put it on at various parties and visited children's hospitals. As a clown, he took the name Pogo. As soon as he was arrested, he explained that he liked the costume very much because the clowns associated him with joy and carelessness. Being a clown relaxed me. I was happy to bring joy to the children. Some people relax when they drink. I used to wear clown makeup and it was because of his dress and makeup that Gacy, already after being caught, gained a nickname, the Killer Clown. In 1975, Gacy was briefly involved in political life. He joined the Democratic Party, but his early career soon ended when rumors of his interest in young boys began to circulate again. And Gacy was getting more and more brutal. One day, he started harassing 16-year-old Tony Antonucci. The boy reacted violently, threatening John to hit him with a chair. So the man for a moment let go, convinced by the way that it was just a joke, nothing serious. A week later, he tried to touch the boy again. He even stuck him in chains, but the teenager managed to free him and knock Gacy to the ground. He never came close to him again. Such luck did not have 17-year-old Johnny Butkovich. The boy hired Gacy to make money to repair his beloved car. At first, the job at John was very good for him. Everything changed when the man refused to pay for the last 2 weeks of work. So the 17-year-old went to Gacy's house with 2 friends. They wanted to force the boss to pay off the money. There was even an adventure, but John wasn't going to pay. But Butkovich disappeared after the incident. No one ever saw him again. A similar fate encountered Michael Bonin. The boy was also 17 years old. He was cunning, hardworking, and capable. He took several orders at a time to make more money. In June '76, he was to meet his father's brother. However, he disappeared on his way to the railway station. He offered a good salary, so he could not complain about the lack of employees. He often drugged his victims, then he slapped, tortured, and finally choked. He hid the bodies under his own house. Only the bodies of the 4 victims he threw into the river, because there was no room under the boards. And besides, there was an unbelievable smell of decomposing bodies throughout the building. Gacy, like most serial killers, was convinced that he was untouchable. He had his own business, he was a businessman, and he had money. He didn't expect anyone to follow in his footsteps. And as usual, this thought led to his capture, because Gacy made a mistake. He did not hide from the fact that he hired young boys, so when 15-year-old Robert Piss disappeared on December 11, 1978, he became the #1 suspect. The boy previously worked in a pharmacy, but decided to change occupation and therefore went to talk to the contractor of construction works. Both the parents and the owner of the pharmacy knew about this meeting. When Robert didn't come home, they called the police. Then the pharmacist told the police that the boy was going to meet John Gacy. The patrol immediately went to the man's house. The cops were hoping to find the boy there whole and healthy. They knocked on the door, but no one answered them. They looked out the window and they saw Gacy sitting in a chair drinking a beer. Finally, they managed to talk to a man. He convinced me that he hadn't seen the boy and had no idea where he was. But the police didn't believe these explanations. Their suspicions got deeper when they checked out Gacy's past. On December 13th, they returned home to the man with a search warrant. John was at the police station at the time, where he was being interrogated. He didn't know at the time that the officers were already in his house, checking every corner. In the building, one of the cops looked into the safe. There he saw a hidden door that led to the underground corridor. After descending, however, the officers found nothing. The room was dry and empty. In the rest of the house, however, valuable evidence has been found. It looked like the trophies that Gacy was collecting after the murders. There were school rings, driving licenses, hair samples, and some teenage clothes. When Gacy found out about the search, he got angry. He immediately contacted his lawyer, who told him not to say anything. The cops let John out and started observing him. They felt they were on the path of a serious case, but they wanted to have hard evidence that would sink the man. Gacy misbehaved with the officers who were constantly accompanying him. He warned his friends not to talk to them. The cops were getting more and more impatient because they couldn't get the evidence that would link John to Robert's disappearance. They analyzed the evidence they had gathered and finally found something they had been waiting for a long time. A charge for a film that belonged to the boy. Robert's mother recognized the flower. That meant one thing. John was lying, and the teenager was at his house. The officers returned to the scene and decided to dig up the underground corridor. There was plenty of water inside, and there were bodies in it. The investigators pulled out pieces of the bodies in a row. Chest cells, skulls, limbs, first one victim, then the second, third, fourth, until they finally stopped at the number of 29. The macabre discovery in Gacy's house shocked the public. The neighbors couldn't believe John, whom they knew, had committed such horrible crimes. His family also survived the shock. As Karen Kuzma, Gacy's sister, said on Oprah Winfrey, it was a blow that nobody was ready for. I couldn't believe it. At 2 o'clock in the night, the phone rang. It was Sam Amerandy, my brother's lawyer. He said, "We have John. He was arrested." I asked if I could talk to him. He said he did, and he gave him the phone. I said, "John, did you do that?" And he replied very, very vaguely, "Yes." I was in shock. I just stood there and didn't know what to do. My husband, who stood by me at the time, just looked at me and we wept. We hugged each other and none of us could believe it, because he wasn't the man we knew. He was always kind, caring for us. It was all just difficult. John confessed not only to his sister, but also to the cops. He confessed to killing 33 people. He hid most of the bodies under his own house. He also described in detail how he spanked and killed his victims. As it turned out, he had his own way. He was pretending to do a magic trick that required a rope. When these were stuck on the wrists of the victims, he said the trick was to have the key. Then he put boys in socks or underwear in the mouth and strangled with a chain wrapped around his neck. Sometimes he put a loop on the neck of the victims and twisted the stick in it. He stopped only when the boys were dying. The trial of John Gacy began on February 6, 1980, in Cook County, Chicago. One of the Crown witnesses was Jeff Rignall. The boy lived through real hell in May 1978. He was walking down the street when a car stopped by him. A stranger gave him a twist. When he felt free, the driver jumped on him and put a cloth on his face, and Jeff lost consciousness. The man took him home. There he took off the boy and tortured him for hours. Later, he threw him into the Lincoln Park in Chicago. Jeff was incredibly lucky. He managed to survive, but the trauma was with him forever. He had no doubts during the trial. The driver who kidnapped him was John Gacy. During the interrogation, the boy cried and vomited, and the killer watched it without the shadow of any emotion. During the trial, they tried to prove that John suffers from schizophrenia, a personality disorder, and is associate. This, according to the experts appointed, was intended to significantly limit his ability to assess what he was doing, but the court had no doubt. Gacy knew what he was doing, and he knew that these were horrible crimes committed on an unlikely scale. The sentence, which came after only 2 hours, could only be one: guilty. Gacy was sentenced to death for killing 33 people. He himself, already in the death cell, persuaded that he did not remember the events of the past. I've already forgotten a lot of things in my life because although I can go back with memories of my childhood, it's not in the 70s anymore. I don't remember a lot of things from that period. The same was true of the crimes and the victims themselves. I don't remember the victims. We have pictures of them all here, but they don't tell me anything. I've never met them. I've been looking through the files many times, but it's just names and faces. They don't tell me anything. But I'm trying to get to know these people, to find out who they were, where they came from, what school they went to, who they met, what they did. And that's what we're looking for each of the victims, but I still don't associate them. I don't think I've ever met them, maybe in politics, maybe as a clown, but I'm not associating. John Wayne Gacy spent 14 years in the death cell. The sentence was executed on the 10th of May 1994. He was given a poison injection. He didn't express repentance just before his execution. He didn't apologize to anyone for what he did. He addressed his last words to the prison guard, who told him, "Kiss me in the..." John Wayne Gacy was 52 at the time of his death. The house where he committed the crime was demolished.